Hi, my name is Tina Thomas. I'll be talking to you today about the salience of social identity and the impact of local businesses in Tenby. This research has begun to investigate whether a disruption to habits following the pandemic might result in the reduced salience or prominence of a triathlete social identity and consequently reduced engagement with the products and services offered by some types of local businesses used by Ironman Wales 2022 on or preceding race day in and around the small town of Tenby in Pembrokeshire. Social identity and its impact upon consumption is being explored from a small business perspective specifically, as larger businesses such as the Ironman Group receive revenue in advance through registration fees, regardless of whether an athlete turns up to the start line or not. However, for smaller local businesses who support race day through the provision of supplementary services at the event or post-event, such as massage or photography, access to such revenue can be reliant upon the athlete's willingness to consume at the race or shortly after, and this may be influenced by the salience of their triathlete social identity. The results of the initial data collection are provided later in this presentation, and this will be through the use of autoethnography, which has explored how the pandemic may have impacted the salience of the triathlete social identity and the future economic implications this may have for some types of small businesses who support the 2022 Ironman Wales event. However, there are also two other further data collection phases that are yet to be completed, and these will include further qualitative research in the form of interviews with athletes, and this will be from a convenience sample available on race day, and this will be followed then by in-depth interviews post-event, which will be explored exploring the results from stages 1 and 2 with a convenience sample of small businesses who are supporting the event to ascertain any changes to the uptake of products or services provided during and shortly after race weekend. This research is limited to small businesses surrounding a specific event. However, future avenues for research may also consider the implications for wider geographical online businesses in the lead up to a race, as outside of the economic benefit to local businesses come race week in Tenby, participation also engages athletes with a number of other businesses in the lead up to a race. And these could be businesses within the hometown of the athlete, but also those provided online. In order to provide context to this research, the Triathlon Industry Association reported that triathlon expenditure in the UK in 2018 amounted to an average of about $2,880 per athlete, and this was worth around $475 million to the UK economy. For almost 10 years, the Ironman Triathlon in Tenby has had a positive economic impact on businesses within the town, but also the wider area of Pembrokeshire. In 2018, the race brought over 3.5 million to Tenby alone, and that was just over the course of race weekend. So there's a fairly sizable economic impact associated with this race. In addition to the economic benefits, there are also health-related benefits, as the race has also been instrumental in increasing participation in sport in the area. And this will obviously have some benefit for businesses related to those areas. However, due to the imposition of social restrictions during the pandemic, this race has not taken place for the past 2 years, and this is likely to have impacted local businesses within Tenby and the surrounding area. And so this research seeks to understand the impact that this break from racing has had upon athletes and the potential for impact upon businesses during and post-race in 2022 when races start again. So let me tell you a little about the autoethnography and some of the findings from that. I have a love of all things triathlon, especially the Ironman triathlon. And as a result of taking part in this sport, being a triathlete is one of my social identities. Being a triathlete can be considered a social identity if we refer to the integrated self. And this consists of connections between cognitive, affective, motivational, and behavioural components of social identity. For example, the cognitive aspects of my triathlete social identity include me thinking about triathlon, which I do much of the time from an athlete perspective. Affective aspects include me thinking things about triathlon, such as what my engagement in the sport represents to others. And this might also be linked to Cooley's looking glass perspective. But there are also motivational and behavioural aspects, as I behave in a certain way depending upon whether I see myself engaging in increased, decreased, or what I consider normal amounts of triathlon training, and also participation in races. And this is particularly relevant for this research. Training for Ironman has become habitual for me. It requires high levels of commitment and dedication. And prior to the advent of the pandemic within our societies, my sporting world was a very different place. Previously, I had once I pressed the button online to confirm my booking at an Ironman event, it felt like I was on a runaway train, or what I imagine that might feel like. And failing a catastrophic personal issue resulting in a transfer or withdrawal, the event was destined to go ahead come what may. And you'd better be ready. So this meant committing to training from that very moment. However, in the current climate, with events being postponed at relatively short notice, it's been incredibly difficult to keep a focused mindset to train, but also extremely difficult to train indefinitely. There must be some promise of the possibility of achievement at the end of training, and this uncertainty has impacted my routines and habits, which has resulted in a change to my physicality, which I feel has reduced the salience of my triathlete social identity. The habitual nature of my training is important to highlight, as habits can be linked to identity and can help to sustain behaviours. Therefore, if habits are broken and identities become less salient, for example, during government restrictions imposed by the advent of a pandemic, there's argument for the reduction of certain identity-related behaviours. But this could also include consumption related to these behaviours, and this is what I think is happening with myself. At the start of the pandemic, and especially during lockdown, I focused on the things I could control, and that included staying active and healthy, as I'm sure many others did. The unbelievable thing that was happening in society and lockdown measures initially had an associated novelty factor. The lack of social interaction meant I had time to teach my classes, work on my research, and also head out to make sure I took advantage of my allocated exercise time each day. However, as time went on, the novelty factor wore off and the realisation this was quite serious kicked in. Over time, food became the entertainment aspect at home, which resulted in some weight gain. I don't know about everyone else, but my evening meal was the highlight of my day, and I may have indulged on more than one occasion. My usual counterbalance to consumption, and food consumption specifically, is consistent triathlon training, and some training could include sort of 60-mile bike rides. However, as events were swiftly cancelled and the measly allocation of daily exercise meant we were unable to travel any further than 5 miles from home, my training regime was severely impacted. And this impacted the fitness levels that I'd worked hard on building in the preceding years. Again, an important part of my triathlete social identity. In addition to this, any training I did do was either solo from home or virtually, so there was no social element of training at the gym, the pool, or with other triathletes. The weight gain, the reduction in training habits, the lack of access to people from my triathlon world and places to go to train hugely impacted my motivation, and so my world grew considerably smaller, and I felt my triathlete social identity shrink with it. And this was along with my desire to purchase certain goods and services in support of this identity. When we were finally liberated from our homes, I felt as though I was unceremoniously hurled back into a larger world, which was quite hard to accept, and it was quite harder to adapt to than it was to retreat from my social worlds in the first place, especially with what I considered my triathlete social identity in tatters. This is important as I still have Ironman races which have been postponed to 2022, providing they go ahead, that is. As registration for Ironman is a significant investment, I do not want to forfeit my entry fee or the additional spend related to hotel and travel that's also been postponed. So, the Ironman group will still benefit economically, whether the salience of my triathlete social identity influences me to turn up at the start line or not. I will turn up, of course, but the reduced salience of this social identity and the ability to get myself in shape enough for this identity to be more prevalent again by the event will likely impact the additional goods and services I usually purchase on race day and beyond from the smaller supporting businesses. If any of you have ever tried to lose weight quickly before, you might understand how problematic this can be and it's sometimes unachievable. If I relate this to the small supporting businesses at Ironman, 2 specific industries spring immediately to mind, and they include photography and massage. My physique is inextricably linked to the salience of my triathlete social identity, and in previous races I've paid for photographs of my race experience. But if my physicality impedes the salience of this identity at the time of the race, I won't engage in this consumption, as I know the image they will present back to me will not be how I perceive will not be how I perceive how I want to look in the eyes of my fellow triathletes. Again, links back to Cooley's looking glass self. And I also don't want to have a tangible reminder. I also usually pay for massage pre and post event, but again, I'm unlikely to engage in these services. Because on-site massages are usually very public and carried out en masse with many other live fellow athletes, I wouldn't want to expose my current physique in this way at the event. I would rather remain anonymous at this time. So I'm not saying this is something that lasts forever. I'm saying this is something we should take into account for a period of time while salience is reduced. So in conclusion, aside from the personal tragedy many have experienced during the pandemic, the economic and societal consequences have undoubtedly been profound. For Tenby in particular, the lack of revenue from hosting Ironman Wales will, I'm sure, have been noticeable by its absence. However, it may be a little presumptuous to imagine things will return to normal in 2022 when the race is next scheduled to be held, if indeed it does go ahead. As this initial research suggests that the break in habitual behaviours of athletes as a result of the imposed restrictions over the past 2 years may have reduced the salience of the triathlete social identity, and this may have further implications for consumption of triathlon-related products and services until this identity once again becomes more prevalent in the athlete. Thank you very much for listening.